or sing a prayer, please just raise your hand. You can come around. We'll do about 10-15 minutes to that, really get warmed up and focused, and then we'll get into our text study, which will be on the divinity of Jesus and the divinity of Baha'u'llah in the Gospel of John. So if you know any of these prayers that I'm going to do now, please sing along at the top of your lungs. Say, God sufficeth all things above all things. Say, God sufficeth all things above all things. And nothing in the heavens, nothing on the earth but God suffices. Say, God sufficeth all things above all things. Say, God sufficeth all things above all things. And nothing in the heavens, nothing on the earth but God suffices. He is in himself the knower. He is in himself sustainer. Verily, the omnipotent. Say, God sufficeth all things above all things. Say, God sufficeth all things above all things. And nothing in the heavens, nothing on the earth but God suffices. He is in himself the knower. He is in himself the sustainer. Verily, the omnipotent. Very nice clapping. Love me, that I may love thee. If thou lovest me not, my love can in no wise reach thee. Love me, that I may love thee. If thou lovest me not, my love can in no wise reach thee. Oh, some spirit, no, it's no servant. Love me, that I may love thee. If thou lovest me not, my love can in no wise reach thee. Love me, that I may love thee. If thou lovest me not, my love can in no wise reach thee. Oh, some spirit, no, no servant. Amame, para que yo te ame. Si tú no me amas, mi amor jamás llegará a ti. Ámame, para que yo te ame. Si tú no me amas, mi amor jamás llegará a ti. Oh, hijo del ser, dame los tiempos. Good. Now, if you'd like to offer, please raise your hand. This young man will come. In Nashville. This is the next installment on our text study of the Bible and the Bahai faith. I'm going to attempt to summarize what we did last time in a way that is clear and helpful to you. Unfortunately, because this is an auditorium, this text study doesn't allow for the discussion, which if we had an hour and a half and we're in a group, we could do, which we could always do. So unfortunately, I'll have to talk at you for 20 minutes. But I hope it's inspiring for you and that you get something out of it. The purpose of these text studies on the Bible and the Baha'i faith is to help a person who is studying the Baha'i faith how to understand that one can be serious about the Bible and still believe that Baha'u'llah somehow is the divine presence. How is it possible that Jesus, this individual from the first century, was the divine presence with divine authority, and then this other individual, but nothing related to him, 1800 years later, is also the divine presence, and still take the Bible seriously? That's kind of the overall goal of this, and for us to become better acquainted with these different sacred texts. Last week, what we focused on was the divinity of Jesus. And we focused on the main gospel from which this belief comes, which is the Gospel of John. And what I did is I gave a little historical background about who wrote the Gospel of John, without getting into the whole thing about the Bible itself. The Gospel of John, you probably know, because it has some of the most famous passages about Jesus, like, I am the way, the truth, and the life. It's the one that has, in the beginning was the Word. It's this long, very famous, very spiritual gospel. The Gospel of John, as far as most Christian scholars think, was written by a group of Jewish people. All the authors of these Gospels are Jews, who were thrown out of their original synagogue for insisting that this other Jewish man named Jesus was actually the appearance of God on earth. That's why they got thrown out, because they were like the obnoxious group that wouldn't be quiet in the synagogue. So it might be 3 or 4 of you in the back insisting, and we get tired of hearing about it, plus it's sacrilegious. So finally we reason with you, we can't get through, you're insisting that this is true, we throw you out. So the Gospel of John was written by this group or man who got thrown out and were writing back to their original synagogue to show them who Jesus was and what they were missing. So there is both assertion of truth that Jesus was the divine presence and condemnation, which is that because you threw us out of the synagogue and rejected it, you are in the darkness. So another thing that we've learned is that the Gospel of John was written, sorry, I couldn't go over these notes because it was a lot to summarize. The Gospel of John was written in the style of the Old Testament, because the Gospel of John begins with, in the beginning. And then it says, and the next day, and the next day, and the third day. So the Gospel of John is formatted like the book of Genesis, the early part of it, to show to the others in the synagogue that Jesus was not like another prophet. Jesus was not like, there have been many Jewish prophets, I don't know if you're familiar with it, like Nehemiah, or Ezra, or Jeremiah, or Daniel. Jesus was not one of those. He was the new creation. That's why often Christians speak about Jesus as the second Adam. So that this man was not just in that same line of succession of prophets, but he was the new creation. That's why the book is formatted like that. Baha'u'llah teaches that whenever God makes man himself manifest, all of creation is infused with a new life. Another point that we saw last time is that in the Gospel of John, it is asserted that no one has seen God in the Father, the unknowable essence, and that we know God through the presence of Jesus. Baha'is believe, similarly, that because God is transcendent, we can't know him directly. Here's my friend said there. I know him because he's a man and I'm a man. He's better looking, but he's still a man. So I understand his reality. He's finite. He's like me. We were both going to die. We were both born. We have a trajectory. But if I were to understand God and know him directly, then I would be on the same level, so I can't. This idea is in the Gospel of John, when it says no one has seen the Father. We know the Father through his appearance in human form, because religion is not magic. Jesus was accused of being a magician, but it's not magic. If any of you have known try to become a better person through religion, it's extremely difficult. It's extremely difficult to improve spiritually. So we know God through his presence in human form. For Baha'is, that human form reoccurs in different times and in different periods. So now we're going to go on to today. There is, read up, please bring up the quotations for today. There you are. The writers of the Gospel of John use a phrase that would have been known to the other Jews, and that phrase is, I am. So you know the famous passage of, I am the truth, the way, and the life. The phrase, I am, for Jewish people of the first century, would have been a declaration that I am divine, because it's what Moses hears in the burning bush. And I'm going to read to you this passage from the Old Testament where this is clear. And the angel of the Lord appeared unto him in a flame of fire out of the midst of the bush. And he looked, he being Moses. And behold, the bush burned with fire, and the bush was not consumed. And Moses said, I will now turn aside and see this great sight. Why the bush is not burnt? When the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called unto him out of the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here am I. And he said, Draw not nigh hither, put off thy shoes from thy feet, for the place whereon thou standest is holy ground. Moreover, he said, I am the God of thy father, etc. So here in the Gospel of John, when the writer puts that very phrase into the mouth of Jesus, you see how it's declaring that this man, Jesus, is the voice of God. And that's how the people in the synagogue would have understood it, and that's why they kicked him out. Because for Jewish people of the first century, the divine presence was not a man, it was a law. And this law that was followed, that was in the temple on the scrolls, that was the divine presence, not a person. That was very strange and sacrilegious. But here are the same words in the Gospel of John. Jesus saith unto him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto me, unto the Father, but by me. If ye had known me, ye should have known my Father also. And from henceforth ye know him, and have seen him. Believest not that I am in the Father, and the Father in me. So this is how the synagogue would have understood it. And this is why they were angry at these individuals. That's the original context of that phrase, I am the truth, the way, and the life. Now, we're almost 2,000 years later. If we interpret that phrase to mean that Jesus was saying that I am the truth, but not anybody else, then we are saying that what the writer of the Gospel of John meant is no other religion can be true. See what I mean? In other words, if we interpret this passage to mean I am the truth, but not Baha'u'llah, then obviously Baha'u'llah cannot be who he claims to be. But in the original context, it's not a statement about other religions or other places. It's one group of Jews writing to another saying, this man was the divine presence. And you all did. That's the end point of the Gospel of John. He's not saying this man is, but not Buddha, but not Baha'u'llah. They didn't know any of these people. The writers of the Gospel of John could not possibly know about Baha'u'llah or Muhammad or any other divine teacher who came later. The reason I emphasize this is for many people who are Christian, who are studying the Baha'i faith, this phrase is a huge stumbling block. Because they are interpreting it to mean, I am the truth, but none of these other people who are later. But that's not what the statement is saying. The statement is telling one group of Jews telling the other, this man is the divine presence. You can turn to him now for new life. The law has been fulfilled. That's the context. And so I emphasize that so that it's not a stumbling block for those of you who are studying the faith. Okay, let's go next passage. Here, this is Baha'u'llah speaking about the appearance of God in human form. Know thou with certainty that the unseen can in no wise incarnate his essence, this is God, and reveal it unto men. He is, and has ever been, immensely exalted, all can either be recounted or perceived. From his retreat of glory, his voice is ever proclaiming, Verily I am God, there is none other God beside me, the all-knowing, the all-wise. I have manifested myself unto men, and have sent down him who is the dayspring of the signs of my revelation. Through him I have caused all creation to testify that there is none other except him, the incomparable, the all-informed, the all-wise. He who is everlastingly hidden from the eyes of men can never be known except through his manifestation. And his manifestation can induce no greater proof of the truth of his mission than the proof of his person. So for a Baha'i, the belief is that God appears in the human temple, speaks to people in human language, in his human kind, in a way that they can understand, the same way that Jesus spoke in parables. Or Baha'u'llah wrote it, Michael was reading the Arabic words in a way that his contemporaries could understand, and we can understand. And that this is how we know God, because of our own, if we do it on, we can't know it. Again, I can know Sefer, but I can't know something that transcends me. No more than the chair can understand who I am. Does that make sense? The phrase, I am the truth, the way, and the life, does not have to be a stumbling block for a person who takes the Bible seriously to come to understand who Baha'u'llah is. Because it's not saying that the man himself has to be, Jesus has to be there for God to be there. Is that clear? I'm hard time reading the basics. Because that point is very, very important if you're going to study the Baha'i faith. There's nothing inherent to that statement and to this part of the Gospel of John that excludes believing the fulfillment of Jesus being Baha'u'llah. Okay, the second, you're going to need to scroll down now, Reza, because we're going to skip ahead to the B section, and we'll finish with this also very important point. The second concept that Baha'u'llah teaches is that God reveals himself at different times through different people. Religion is not, or revelation is not a one-time event. This idea that it's a one-time event really comes from first century Judaism. And many of us who were raised in the West, I don't know about it in the Middle East, but certainly in the West, have this idea that it's a one-time thing. It happened once, and then there's going to be an end of the world. Many of us still have this idea that the world is coming to an end, and that's proven in the Bible. Our belief of the Baha'is is that it's not. This is never going to come to an end. There are deeper meanings to this. And that God will always reveal himself. The Baha'i faith in this building will not be the last form of religion. There will be others in the future which we can't understand. Imagine if we try to imagine a future religion which would replace the Baha'i faith, which will happen. Can you imagine that? I can't even imagine what it's like. I sometimes think it'll be a woman or something like that. Something really that will shift our paradigm. That would have been just as hard for the first century Jews to imagine the fulfillment of Judaism, or for the fourth century Christians to imagine something beyond Jesus. It's not comprehensible. For us to sit here and think there's going to be something after Baha'u'llah is very hard to understand. And yet this is the Baha'i teaching. God makes himself known at different times through different people. This Baha'i teaching is a phrase to it called progressive revelation. God reveals himself progressively through time. Well, here is an example of progressive revelation in the Gospel of John himself. And I'm reading here, the passage B. Now you're too far. Now you're too, you want to go before that. Stop. Avery. Art thou greater than our father Abraham? This is the geographic of Jesus about himself. Art thou greater than our father Abraham, which is dead, and the prophets are dead? Whom makest thou thyself? Jesus answers, if I honor myself, my honor is nothing. It is my Father that honoreth me, of whom ye say that he is our God. Yet ye have not known him, but I know him. And if I should say I know him not, I shall be a liar unto you. But I know him, and keep his saying. Your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it and was glad. And then said the Jews unto him, Thou art not yet 50 years old, and thou hast seen Abraham. Jesus said unto them, Verily, verily, I say unto you, before Abraham was, I am. Now the readers of this would have understood what this means. That Jesus was laying claim to divinity, and he was saying, I am the constant Word of God. So, and the Jews, by the way, after this, they stoned him. They started throwing stones at him. Because it's blasphemous for them that their law would be replaced by this guy, and they understand that that's what he's saying. And this is what the Baha'i faith teaches, is that the religion is, the truth of the religion is not its outer form. It's its inner reality. In the beginning was the Word. The divine Word and will of God, which is eternal, not a person. The man, Baha'u'llah, will be succeeded in the future by another source of authority. And this will challenge people of that time, whenever that time comes. In the same way that when Jesus appeared, it challenged Moses. Does that make sense? Now we're going to close here with the related passage. You have to skip one ahead and we're done. There. And this is the passage from the Baha'i book of Certitude, which summarizes this idea of progressive revelation. And I'm going to end with that. If this is interesting for you, I want to speak about it further. I don't hang around, but it's not. Thank you for staying. Here's from the Baha'i writing. Furthermore, it is evident to thee that the bearers of the trust of God are manifest unto the peoples of the earth as the exponents of a new cause and the bearers of a new message. Inasmuch as these birds of the celestial throne are all sent down from the heaven of the will of God, and as they all arise to proclaim his irresistible faith, they therefore are regarded as one soul and the same person. For they all drink from the one cup of the love of God, and all partake of the fruit of the same tree of oneness. These manifestations have a twofold station. One is the station of pure abstraction and essential unity. In this respect, if thou callest them all by one name, and dost ascribe to them the same attribute, thou art not erring in the truth. For they, one and all, summon the people of the earth to acknowledge the unity of God. There is a twofold station. One is the divine station. So in the beginning was the Word. Before Abraham was, I am. That's the divine station. It's unchanging. But then there's the specific station. Jesus is Jewish, talking to Jews, trying to help them understand the Jewish context. Baha'u'llah is Persian, Shia Muslim. He's trying to explain to Shia Muslims the divine message, which is why those of us who are not Muslim, it's difficult to understand in Baha'i Baha'i writings. The Buddha was speaking to people in the Ganges River Valley in ways that they understood. So each of them are completely different, and yet they are all the same. And this is the Baha'i teaching, and we find it in the Gospel of John. We can still read the Gospel of John, still believe I am the truth, the way, and the life, and still accept Baha'u'llah and be faithful to both. So I hope that was interesting. I'm sorry to talk at you. And that's unfortunately the format of the auditorium. If this was interesting for you and you want to talk about it more, I'll hang around. Otherwise, thank you for coming. Would anybody like to offer a closing prayer? Marie, would you like to sing a closing prayer today? Thank you. And thanks everybody. Have a good day.